Today's guest invites us into one of life's deepest and most universal questions. How do we live fully in a world where everything is constantly changing? And Tashi Slater is a writer and speaker who explores how our personal histories and cultural roots shape who we become, and how we can find meaning in a world where nothing stays the same. In her powerful new book, Traveling in Bardo, The Art of Living in an Impermanent World, Anne weaves together deeply personal stories of marriage, friendship, parents and children, and creative life with the wisdom of her Tibetan ancestors and the rich spiritual insights of Buddhist thought. The result is a beautiful reflection on impermanence, not as something to fear, but as something that can actually teach us how to live more deeply, more gratefully, and more awake in the present moment. Today we'll explore how embracing change can transform the way we relate to love, loss, identity, and the passage of time. And Tashi Slater, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Your book explores the idea of impermanence, which feels so unsettling for most people. It's probably one of the hardest things to do. Yet you suggest it can actually deepen our experience of life.
Yes, yes. And the funny thing is that we struggle against impermanence. We struggle against change, and we don't want things to change, and we don't want the life we love to end, and people we love to die, and we don't, of course, ourselves want to die. But those are actually things that we can't change, right? And so the challenge for us and the beauty, I think, of this way of looking at life is that when we do accept it, it actually keeps us from holding back. Do you know what I mean? Because I think that we hold back in life because we want to protect ourselves, and we want to protect ourselves from change. And we think, oh, I don't want to suffer, and I don't want the people I care about to suffer. And so we maybe don't go fully into a relationship because we're afraid we're going to get hurt in some way when something changes, or if it ends. We're like, what if it ends?
Yeah.
And so it's like, what if it ends? So I'm not going to go fully into it because it might end, and then I'm going to suffer. Or we may not take a trip somewhere that would be a really lovely thing to do, a wonderful thing to do for our personal growth. Because we're afraid of something bad happening, right? And getting out of our routine. And of course, we can't control the changes that happen, and we can't control the way that, we don't know what's going to happen in a relationship, which is actually one of the complexity of life, and the uncertainty of life is part of the beauty of life, right? But I think we feel that we need to protect ourselves from it. Mm-hmm. And so we hold back. And so when we open ourselves fully to whatever may come, to whatever changes there may be, then we can live fully in whatever time we have, because we don't know, we don't know how long we have, right?
How do you get out of this monkey mind pattern of being in the past and being in the future and not being in the present moment?
It's a great question, and I think we all get into that sort of like monkey mind kind of hopping around. We think about past things, either things that maybe we regret and we wish they had gone differently, or we just sort of muse about what happened yesterday, or we speculate about the future and what we want to happen, and all of which is to say that we're not here now in this moment. Which is a really odd thing, right? Because our bodies are here, yours is here right now, and mine is here, but our minds can be like totally somewhere else. And so in the teachings, in the Bardo teachings, which is how I frame my book, and in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is, very briefly, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is used to guide the dead person through the Bardo, or intermediate passage from death to rebirth. And so when my Tibetan grandmother died, for example, at her funeral, they read from the book to guide her to her next life. But interestingly, it's also meant for the living, and it's meant to guide us from birth to death. And one of the things that the monks, right, or the lamas keep saying is the original translation, which my great grandfather helped to bring to the West. One of the things they keep saying, and is kind of in this old English, is that they say, "Let not thy mind be distracted." And it really struck me when I first, started learning about this, and when I saw it at my grandmother's funeral, because I thought, why do they keep saying that? I'm like, because you think it'd be like, I don't know exactly what I thought would be said, but this is this 8th century text, right? And they're saying, like, let not thy mind be distracted. And the idea is that if we don't pay attention, we can't see what actually is happening, what our present reality is, right? And so one of the things that happens then is we just sort of float along, and we're not paying attention to, for example, let's say in the Bardo, From Death to Rebirth, one of the ideas in the teaching is that we're not paying attention to, we don't realize the fact that we're dead. Right? We don't realize the fact that we're dead because we're sort of thinking about the past, like, oh, I was supposed to have dinner with so and so, tomorrow, and now I'm not going to be able to, or I had these big plans for my new house, or whatever it is. And so we don't actually realize the reality of our our present situation, and therefore, in this concept, right, of the Bardo teachings, we're not able to move forward.
That's an
And so it's
interesting
a real,
point.
right. And so we can't actually move forward to our next life, whatever that may be.
There's one passage in your book where you mention this situation where people suddenly die without preparation, and that their spirit somehow seems to be around where
Right,
where they
right,
don't know where they really are.
right. And the idea is that that actually that in general, unless you're an enlightened lama, which unfortunately most of us are not, we hover around after we die because we are in denial, right? And my grandmother used to tell this very striking story about when she was in Tibet in the 1920s. She went to a funeral, which is like a sky burial, and there was the body laid out on the ground, and the lamas were reading from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And she said one of the lamas could see that the dead person was trying to re-enter his body, right? And and I said, really? I said, did you see that? And she goes, well, we couldn't see it. We're like lay people, but they could see that this is what was happening. And the idea is that the dead person was in denial and not willing to accept the reality of his situation, or to kind of even register it. Do you know what I mean? And this goes back to your question about distraction, is we're distracted by, dreams of the past or speculations about the future. And so the same would be true in our life from birth to death, right? Which is, what this is also, giving us guidance for. And so when we don't pay attention, right? If we don't pay attention to our present reality, then we can just sort of float along, right? And we don't devote time to what we care most about. And I think this is one of the key points, is that how people are like, oh my gosh, where did the time go? Suddenly I'm 50, right? Or,
Yes,
or
yes.
suddenly I'm 70 and I meant to do this and I meant to do that. And what happens is that the Tibetan Book of the Dead urges us to guide. They use the idea of a horse and a bridle, and that to guide our mind, or to guide our attention in the same way you would guide a horse with a bridle, rather than just letting it like thunder along wherever, as we
Yeah.
often do. And so when we do this, right, we actually can make sure that we are devoting time to what matters most to us,
What
right? And yeah.
advice would you give to people who are locked into this sadness of the past, loss of someone that they loved, loss of a pet that they lost, uh, or loss of a job or a home? I'm looking at refugees who had to flee and who can't relate to the present or to what might happen in the future.
One of the things that comes to mind is that when my grandparents, my Tibetan grandparents, when my Tibetan grandfather died, or what happened is he had a heart attack when my grandparents were in Calcutta, and my grandmother rushed him back to Darjeeling, where my family is from, so that the proper Tibetan funeral rites could be carried out. And she was very clear. She used to tell me this story, and she said, "Oh, I wanted to make sure that the proper rituals were carried out." And also, she was very accepting of the fact that he was dying, and that she wanted to help him move forward in the way that would, in the Tibetan belief, be uh, good for a good rebirth. And her acceptance, and this I think is one of the really interesting points, is her acceptance of the fact that he was dying didn't mean that of course, that she wasn't sad, and it also didn't mean that she wouldn't grieve. And in fact, what it did is allowed her to grieve more, because she accepted, she was very accepting of the fact and she said she had actually seen his death in a dream, not long before he actually died. And so she knew that it was going to happen. And it allowed her, it goes back to what you and I talked about just now in the beginning of our conversation, about how you can embrace what's happening and you can embrace change. And it doesn't mean it's necessarily a happy thing, and that it means that a lot of times, we just hold on, like we cling to people, or we cling to the past because it's too painful for us to be like, okay, this is over, right? But in fact, if we are accepting of it, we can open ourselves to fully grieving and moving forward in whatever way is right for us.
I think that's just an important point you mentioned, because if you suppress that feeling of grief or sadness, it compounds, and it finds other avenues in some way.
Exactly, exactly. And again, it feels counterintuitive to us because we think we're protecting ourselves,
Yeah.
right? And so you're like, oh no, I can't, I can't like let go of this person, or let go of whatever this painful thing is, because it'll be too painful, right? To do that. So it doesn't feel like it's actually going to help us
Mhm.
to open ourselves to it, but it does.
And coming to attachments, of course, we have most of our attachments in relationships,
Yeah.
in partnerships, in friendships, with siblings, with family. And looking through the lens of impermanence, how do we accept that relationships change and evolve and even change in many ways, especially with those people we really love?
It goes to something that the Tibetan Book of the Dead also says, that I think of as really one of the central points of the the teachings, which is to accept reality but not give up. And we so let's say change in a relationship, as you're saying, change in a marriage, change in a friendship, and certainly relationships are one of the things we struggle with the most, and that make us the happiest as well, can make us the happiest. Um, is that we often don't want to see like what is, like we don't want to accept what is, and so in the same way, like we don't want to admit that, like, so, like the dead person doesn't want to say, yeah, I'm dead. We don't want to say, my marriage is over, for example, even if it is, right? And this is again, the really strange thing about us as human beings, right? Is that by fighting against what is, it reminds me when my children were small and they would close their eyes and think whatever was out there, was not there anymore, right? Because they couldn't see it. And it's like that. And so we don't want to accept what is, because again, we think that it will be too painful, right? Or we're holding on. But the first point I think is that we're holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore. Let's take the example of marriage. So a happy marriage, it's not happy anymore, it's over, but you're clinging to something that doesn't actually exist, right? And if we say, actually, it's not happy anymore, and this actually really is over, then we can open ourselves to that reality and be like, and one of the interesting points here is it's related to the idea of karma, which we think of in the West often as meaning fate. So this is, just my fate, whatever this has happened, and so on and so on. But in the Buddhist way of looking at things, karma means action.
Yeah, I think karma
And
is just about one of the most misunderstood concepts in the spiritual world. Can you just
exactly.
go into that a bit more, uh,
Yeah.
how you understand it from your perspective?
Karma has to do with cause and effect. And and the wonderful thing about it is that when we have a true understanding of it, it gives us agency rather than us feeling like we're at the effect of things, like these things just happen to me. Um, and so when I first heard about karma as action, I found it kind of daunting because I thought, like, what, like start a revolution or like you have to like move to a new country or some like huge thing. But it's not necessarily that. It actually means actions of body, speech, and mind. And so it can be something physical that you do. It can be something you say. So you can be like, oh, why do I keep getting in the same pointless arguments with my partner? You're like, and you realize, oh, well, maybe it's because I actually tend to say this kind of thing. So you might decide to say something different,
I
right?
think the
And
misunderstanding is often that this is predestined. You can't do
exactly.
anything
You
about it.
can't
And
do
you say,
anything.
no, there is a really purposeful intent that you can do to change something.
Right.
For
Right.
instance, the choice of words that you use or actions,
Yeah.
especially in relationships, I think.
Exactly. And mind means think something different, right? Change the way you're thinking about something, put a different frame on it. And so these actions may seem very minor, right? Or small, but that's what our lives are made of, right? Are these like small actions that we take and, whatever they may be. And so going back to the example of, accept reality, but don't give up. If we accept, okay, my marriage is over, then it opens the door for us to decide what we would like to do about that. What kind of action do you want to take? Physical action? You're going to move out? Speech? Say something different? Mind? Think something different. But point being is it gives us agency rather than our feeling crushed by the
Yeah, yeah.
situation.
And I firmly believe sometimes the universe has a different plan. And I mean, I've personally gone through traumatic divorce,
Mm.
and looking at it in retrospect, I'm now in a happier relationship. I learned a lot from the previous relationships, which
Right.
then helped the present relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the main ideas about Bardo as well, is that for example, when you were going through your divorce, right, that was a kind of Bardo. So Bardo can be, as I said, death to rebirth, birth to death. It also can be a time when our ordinary reality is suspended. So it could be illness, it could be divorce, it could be an accident, and so on. And if we are open to it and we have an open perspective, there are actually many deep insights available to us during these periods, even as we kind of kick and scream, right,
Yeah,
against them.
yeah,
But if we
yeah.
look at it in a certain way, we can really see new things. And so what you're saying really resonates with that
Mm.
because you saw a lot of new things through your experience, right?
Absolutely. Definitely new perspective and more wisdom. I had an interesting conversation with a hospice pastor a while back, and she said, well, she's done several thousand people that she attended to when they passed. And she said one of the most difficult things for people who die is this attachment to unresolved family issues. And here we come back to do we choose the parents when we reincarnate? What do we learn from these intimate relationships,
Yeah.
starting with our core family?
Mm-hmm. And metaphorically speaking, of course, whether one believes in reincarnation or not, or death to rebirth and so on, um, your example, for example, of a new relationship is a kind of reincarnation. It's the beginning of a new life. And so in our journey or our trajectory from birth to death, we have many like deaths within life, if you will, right? And so it could be the end of a relationship, the end of a job,
Yeah, I
whatever
think
it may
this
be,
is
right?
this is the key message of the crucifixion in Christianity, which is also very, very misunderstood. But the
Hmm.
message
Hmm.
is actually not the crucifixion, but the resurrection, moving out of that pain into a new beginning.
Into a new life, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that would be the idea of rebirth, in from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective of rebirth within our lives, from birth to death, and that we have, that possibility is always available to us, and we just often don't feel like it is.
Hmm, hmm. Going back to your own biography, your Tibetan ancestors and their stories that you mention in your book, you mentioned your grandmother and your great grandfather who wrote the Book of the Dead. What did exploring your family history teach you about how the past shapes our inner lives?
It taught me a lot. I I grew up very much not connected to my family history or Tibetan Buddhism or anything like that. And I grew up in New Jersey and then in California, mostly in California. And my mother came over at 19 from Darjeeling to go to medical school and become a doctor and never went back to live. And she really wanted me and my brother and sisters to feel that we fit in. And we were growing up in a time, it's very different now in the United States, but at that time there was, it was the 60s and 70s in suburban America, and there just were not other Asian American kids. Now, I mean, of course, it's, as I say, it's totally different, but we were the only ones. And children, I mean, we all want to fit in, but children really want to fit in. And my mother wanted us to feel we fit in. So that was part of the reason. And plus, she herself wanted to kind of leave behind the old country and plunge into into America. And so we were not raised with I was not raised with any Buddhist teachings, any kind of Buddhism. I didn't I went to Darjeeling for about a year between when I was 2 and 3 years old, and then not again till 20 years later.
At what point
And
did you reconnect with your ancestral past?
well, what happened is it started after college for me when I was 23, because what happened is I spent all these years trying not to connect with it because because I really wanted to fit in. And the problem, of course, is my mother's strategy. I understand why she did it, but we couldn't fit in is the way that I couldn't fit in the way I wanted to because I didn't, because of the way I looked. It didn't matter whether I knew about Buddhism or whatever we did at home. Is I just looked really different because I had dark hair and dark eyes and olive skin, and so I really avoided it, and I didn't want anyone to know actually that I was, what we would say in those days half, like half Tibetan. My father is American from New Jersey. So after college, I majored in comparative literature, French and Latin American literature, and my plan was to go live in Paris and be a writer. And somehow, when I graduated from college, I just couldn't quite do it. I couldn't get it together to go there because I was just felt very troubled by something. And I think what happened is I just felt like there was this big blank sort of on the map of myself. Like what was this other half? Like, what did that even mean? And of course, half American, half Tibetan sounds odd anyway, because you're American and you have a certain ethnic background, but that's how I grew up thinking. And so what happened is I pivoted, and instead of going to Paris, I went to Darjeeling. And I think it was some sort of like almost like a homing pigeon is the way I read about that. That's what it felt like as I was like,
So you immediately felt at home in Darjeeling.
no, no, I didn't. I didn't feel at home, but I went to spend time with my grandmother because my grandfather had died recently and she was alone. And I, I felt, I mean, I didn't immediately feel at home because it's a very, very different environment from, California. But she and I did, little by little, we ended up becoming close, and we had a lot of conversations which informed the book, right, as you know, and over the years. And it was also very, what shall I say, affirming for me to be in this environment where, everyone looked like me. I thought, wow, this is great. I was like, this is like, it was so, because I was so used to being the odd girl out, and not
Yeah,
looking like the others. And nobody, there wasn't that sort of, maybe people looked at me, of course, they're like, oh, she's American, right? But not in any, but much more, I felt there was a much more inclusivity for me, funnily enough, right?
yeah.
Than the environment that I had grown up in.
Uh, you have a copy of your book with you there.
Yes,
And if you can just hold it up so people can see it.
this is the book.
There we go. And there is a page on page 105 I thought was particularly relevant to people who have a difficult time with distraction and finding a way of being more attentive in life. If you
Mhm.
could read that for us, please.
Yes, I'd be delighted to. We tend to think of reality as monolithic. We know it exists and we know what it is. But what we pay attention to determines the nature of our reality. Although we are always paying attention, the question is to what? Once we realize that what we perceive depends on what we focus on, we can direct our attention in ways that expand and deepen our engagement with the world around us, whether we pay attention to the winter rain or a hawk gliding in the sky or the suffering of others. O nobly born, listen with full attention without being distracted, the Tibetan Book of the Dead urges us. Rather than housekeeping in a dream, allowing ourselves to be spirited away in a never ending parade of thoughts and reveries, we can exist in this moment, which is all we ever have anyway. Instead of diminishing our happiness by being distracted, we can develop a new awareness of our inner and outer worlds that allows us to live fully here, now.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
And I do want to acknowledge you for writing this book. I think it's very important for the time in which we live, where we have this constant pull from everywhere to distract our mind from what I believe is our real purpose in elevation of consciousness and
I agree.
being aware of the present moment. So I want to thank you for that. And for listeners who may be facing uncertainty or challenges in life, I really recommend this book. They can buy it where good books are sold, I presume,
Everywhere.
and I will post the link in the show notes below. And thank you so much for being with us today, Anne.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, and I really loved our conversation. Thank you.